Good afternoon and welcome to this coffee hour with the Time of the Writer. My name is Shafinaaz Hassim and I have the pleasure of moderating a fascinating panel of short story writers, multi-genre writers really, where we're looking at beyond words in the form of short story, the beloved short story. We've definitely seen waves of it over the years and a recent rise with none other than award-winning writer Niq Mhlongo. We'll be looking at his latest edited anthology, Hauntings, along with a number of fellow contributors. I've got Lynn Joffe, Mncedisi Shabangu, Joanne Hichen, and I've also got short story writer Lindiwe Nkutha this afternoon to share some of how much it is that short story, the power of short story has worked to create and to shape the narratives that they write. Before I welcome everyone on the panel today, I want to thank Time of the Writer for creating this opportunity once again to speak in the virtual space and take the energy of the festival online. Welcome everyone. So wonderful to have everyone on board today. And I just, I've just this few days I've been reading through the short stories, so I am looking forward to getting into the meat of the discussion. To introduce all our illustrious writers and artists today, let me just get through some of the bios. We've got Joanne Hichen, author and editor from Cape Town, and she's edited numerous short story collections, especially Adults Only, which won the NIHSS for edited collections in 2015. I just want to add that Hauntings has been shortlisted. I have insider information that Hauntings has been shortlisted for this year's NIHSS fiction edited collections. So we have something to look forward to. Joanne also has written widely in various genres. Her latest, Death and the After Parties on Death and Dying, was longlisted for the Sunday Times CNA Literary Awards for nonfiction, and also longlisted for the NIHSS 2022. We've got Lynn Joffe, who's raised on 4 continents. That powerfully comes through in your story. She's produced a vast array of, she's a storyteller of various genres as well, storytelling projects for radio, stage, and TV. And she's performed in a variety of self-penned cabaret. I wish we could have some of that on show today. And published a children's picture book, The Tale of Stingray Charles. She's produced and presented a 13-part jazz series called Bejazzled. I love that, which flighted across Africa. Her debut novel, The Gospel According to Wanda B has become a bit of a media sensation since it was published and was longlisted for the Sunday Times CNA Literary Awards in 2021. It's also been longlisted for the Fiction Award NIHSS 2022. So welcome on board, Lynn. We look forward to listening to your story as well. Mncedisi Shabangu is an actor, playwright, and director in the South African theatre scene. Such a pleasure to have you on board. His writing credits include a whole range of writing, and as a theatre maker, he says he draws deeply on actual events of his life and cultural influences. This comes through very strongly in your contribution in Hauntings. He's also, from the 90s, been awarded scholarships through the Market Theatre Lab, Barney Simon Trust, and the English Speaking Union to attend courses at the Royal National Theatre Studio in London. And congratulations on your contribution in Hauntings, bringing you into the field of short story writing. We've got writer Lindiwe Nkutha. I've got to say, Lindiwe moonlights perhaps as in the finance industry as an accountant, and then in the evening, I think, or at night, dons this cape of joining the superheroics of short story writing and shapes and forms various forms of narrative. So I look forward also. In fact, when we talk about short stories, Lindiwe, I want to start with you. Let's jump right in and say, when we talk about the power of short story writing, we often say writers have so many ideas when it comes to novels. If we had all the years in the world, 100 years to write 100 novels, so to speak, then those ideas are sometimes born in the form of short story. How does short story really entice you as an artist, as a writer? And what have you used to develop your ideas and your narratives in this story form?
Yeah, I mean, it's a poignant question. Short stories, historically, I mean, dating back to the 19th century, even the 18th century, have kind of been the preserve of those people who didn't have a lot of time to write, right? Virginia Woolf tells us about you need to have a room of your own. If you don't have a room of your own and you have like spreadsheets to contend with and such like things, it's kind of like difficult to sit and dedicate yourself to like a long form narrative. Kafka, who is one of my influences, had an interesting life as well. Kafka was a lawyer who worked for an insurance company, and some of his best writings actually come in the form of short stories or novellas and those kinds of things. And in the 50s in South Africa, we see with the emergence of the drum era, where people who are working as journalists essentially, or people who are working as something else, kind of have this outlet in drum magazine or in journals that are current at the time to kind of produce this bite-size work, right? Because even in the short story, you can create like a complete comprehensive world and whatever. You just have to be terse about it, and you have to, you know, like the skill of writing a short story is slightly different from that of writing a novel, in that in 5,000 words, you have to do what a novelist can do in 30,000 words or 50,000 words or whatever. So it's expediency of availability of time, expediency in availability of time of the writer, expediency in the availability of time of the reader as well, because a lot of time the reader doesn't have like, you know, that expansive amount of time to kind of sit and delve into a novel. But you can take a story, or you can take stories, or you can take worlds in kind of bite sizes of 5,000 words and whatever. And so it affords those of us who are not fortunate enough to live entire existences as writers to kind of also delve into this literary sphere and be able to provide offerings to an audience who is able to kind of take it in bite sizes as well. So that for me is the allure of the short story.
That's fantastic, and absolutely quite true when you say that it takes a certain amount of skill and talent as well to be able to bring your story into the space of 3,000 to 5,000 words, which you might have more leeway in generating and making your characters more sort of available to the audience in the space of a novel. So it definitely does make that much of a difference in terms, I mean, it does take a lot more talent as well. So thank you for that. If we talk about hauntings and the idea that, you know, the concept of is something, are you haunted by something physically? Is it a philosophical question? Is it a metaphysical question? Let us introduce the editor of this collection, who doesn't, in the literary sphere, doesn't need a massive introduction, but I would be doing myself injustice if I didn't share. Niq Mhlongo is a celebrated Soweto-born writer, editor, and travel journalist who graduated from Wits with a BA in 1997. He's written 4 novels, 2 collections of short stories, Affluenza and Soweto Under the Apricot Tree, and he's edited various collections, including Black Text, Burden of Ubuntu. He's also edited stories about Johannesburg called Joburg Noir, and now the Hauntings collection. Welcome, Niq. Give us an idea of your motivation for this collection, especially Hauntings, and I mean the vast array. One might assume when you read a heading like Hauntings that this would follow a certain metaphysical direction. But there's so much of politics and philosophy and childhood memory in here that let's hear it from you. Where did this begin, and where will it go?
Thank you, Shafinaaz, and thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you, Time of the Writer, for affording us this space to talk about Hauntings. Just to so that you know, actually, I don't want to take all the credit. I think credit for Hauntings goes to all of us. I mean, the writers that are there. It goes also particularly to the team at Jacana, because actually it came with them, these Hauntings. I mean, Maggie called me at some point. We often have these chats, me and Maggie, and then so she came with, after doing job at NUA, she said to me, how about we write about something that something that haunts us, you know, ghost. It can be a ghost story, it can be anything, because these are the stories that normally don't make it to other publishers. You know, you write about a ghost story, sometimes you're not taken serious. I mean, they don't take you seriously. But Maggie said to me, let's talk about these stories. There are lots of stories out there. And then I fell in love with that because it afforded me, I love a short story format, for instance, because it affords me that intimacy. You know, when you write and then you write without having to explain yourself too much. You know, it's intimate in a sense that when you want to write a particular theme, you focus on that particular theme. Unlike when you are writing a novel, you tend to, I mean, you'll tell yourself, this is what I'm writing about, but people interpret it differently. But with short stories, because you are so much focused into it, it's easier for one to, delve into a particular topic that is burning within you, that you would like people to know in a more like a serious way and an intimate way. So when Maggie and the rest of the Jacana team afforded me this opportunity, I thought, wow, there are lots of stories out there that I hear from people. I read quite a lot of people's Facebook, for instance. I stalk people, I stalk authors, they might not know. And then, and once I understand that this is, this theme, this particular writer has written about something that needs to be told, I earmark them and say, okay, once I have an opportunity, we can, talk about these things, you know. So I think the long and short of it, Hauntings came through an effort not only by me, but also by a Jacana team. And then it was made possible and made interesting by the quality of the stories that are there, by the 19 authors that we have in it. And some of these authors, actually, I communicate with them. They give me stories, and I really check which one has got, it's more, it's more within the context of this particular writing. Like, for instance, I knew that when I was, the story that Mncedisi has written, for instance, is the story that he used to tell me. I used to visit him in, we do visit each other, you know. So I visited him at some point at his home. That was a long time ago. And then he told me this story, and I put it in the back of my mind. I said, this is haunting. But once I have a chance, and that was about 10 years ago, once I have a chance, I will definitely invite him to write this story. So this is how I operate, actually, yeah.
So when I went through, I mean, obviously I read the introduction that you wrote, and then I went through some of the stories, some that of the authors are here and some are not. And the diversity from the simple thing of what Hauntings brings up to you as a writer, as a person. We've all heard ghost stories growing up. Right off the cuff, the introduction, you talk about the stories, the sort of rumored hauntings around Soweto, and the highway hauntings, and the kind of fear that's generated out of stories of ghosts. Makes me realize that all of these stories have elements of truth and have been kind of carved around these fictional narratives. Soweto seems to be like, the highways seem to be kind of patrolled by lost souls, by ghosts, by gulls, or whatever word you might put to them. It's such an important thing, I think, to document that. We stand on the edge of fascination and fear, and this is what this book does. Each of your stories does that and asks questions in different ways. When I look at Joanne's story, that's not a ghost story, but the lootings people are haunted sometimes. Are we more haunted by the things we did or the things we didn't do? We're caught in that grip, and Joanne, I want to hear from you about the lootings, the philosophical bent around what it means to feel haunted, to be haunted.
It was a really kind of interesting challenge for me to write that story. As I was writing from the point of view of a Black man in a very poor township who was affected by the hauntings. He and his children go to the local mall and they begin to loot, along with a lot of people that they know, their community. For me, it was definitely a sense of a haunting, a result of a haunting from the past. Apartheid, also the new government, a sense of waiting for a better life, for things to happen. So for me, that was the haunting that I was dealing with. This past haunting that has somehow found itself in our modern society, and then it will continue to haunt people. What actually happened during those weeks of the lootings in Durban and other areas. I think we'll be haunted by those actions for a long time, and people there are still haunted by it. So many deaths happened, so many people were killed, businesses destroyed. It really made us think very hard about who we are as a people and how we want to move forward. And it also highlighted the poverty and the desperation of people. And I think that's what I was trying to highlight. And of course, there's a mother in the story as well who has since died of COVID, and her husband is haunted by the lack of her presence. He's haunted by her, and he listens to her voice. So I try to bring in all those aspects of haunting. And in fact, when I was writing the story, I sent a synopsis to Niq. We were in conversation at that point. And I said, Niq, why don't you write the story? I had this great dream last night. I think you must write the story. And then I sent a message back to him automatically. And I said, no, I want to write the story. So that is just a little behind the scenes tidbit. But that's how I came to the story, is basically a past haunting connected to the present, which was that time of the lootings in Durban, and which will haunt us forever. So in a sense, it's definitely kind of a story of memory, imagination, and conscience, because what do we do with that information now? Thanks, Shafinaaz.
I thought it was wonderful how you brought together this idea of, the question is around how much regret there is, how we're haunted by regret, and yet how much choice do we have once carried by the crowd? So there's kind of this almost mob personality that takes over the human mind. And yet we're capable of regret, disappointment, broken or haunted by dreams deferred, so to speak. And all of that comes through so beautifully in your story. But also the way your character, Dumi, thinks about his lost wife. It seems to be a way of dealing with his grief, keeping her present as an energy. So I really enjoyed that interplay of the energies, and it brought a completely different perspective to Hauntings, where I started off with a preconceived notion maybe, and it made me stretch that sort of thinking. It was a very important, each of your contributions were very important into stretching the imagination around what it means to feel haunted, to be possessed, whether it's by grief or regret or some kind of metaphysical outside force. And so that's why, it brings me back again, Niq, to this idea that being haunted is, that we're haunted by ghosts, and that ghosts have certain amount of agency, perhaps, on how we construe life and what it means to actually live around these entities that may or may not be seen. Are they figments of imagination? Does the unseen world really, is it a whole separate world that exists out there and we're just limited in our way of intercepting it? And it also comes through, Lynn, in your story, Nightmare on Isipingo Street, in so many ways. And you say memories, you start off by saying memories are as poltergeists of the past. I found that so interesting that you start off like that, because it's so reflective. And you're able then to delve into this dealing with trauma, and how trauma is a way of being haunted by the past, but it also carries one into the future. Please talk to us about the story of yours, and traversing childhood through adulthood, carrying the trauma along with us.
So, and thank you. It's so deep. I wanted to, if you would like, metaphoricize the idea of the haunting in my culture, as I come from a Jewish background, but very, very secular. And I discovered through in a way Niq's challenge to write the story, that the dibuk from the ancient Jewish mythological culture is very allied with the tokolosh idea. And in a sense, if you say all memory is a haunting of some kind, as I say in the story. So I wanted to, if you like, instead of talking about my traumatic past or the traumatic past of the character, because the moment you start to write it, it fictionalizes. So it was based a lot on the trauma of coming to South Africa as a little white girl in the middle of apartheid and not knowing what was happening. The lady who worked for the mythological grandparents, and then the haunting of the father figure, the haunting of the maid, as she was called, Evie, in the back room, who was actually in a relationship with the husband who was beating her up, but she blamed the tokolosh. So I wanted to bring a kind of a cultural, not comparison, but a cultural kind of merging or rubbing against expectation by bringing the young girl and her being sat on by her Jewish tokolosh, and then the African tokolosh, which is very similar in the psyche of mankind, which is probably where ghosts come from, because on a psychological level, whether they exist or not, they're existing in the mind and in the imagination. So I wanted to bring as well, I often start writing memoir, and then it has to shift into sort of through the furnace of imagination into something else, into something other. A friend of mine said, your grandparents weren't that horrible. I said, but they're not my grandparents. They are the fictional grandparents who were necessary in order for that story to be told. So, and also mindful of the company that is being kept in this in Niq's collection. To actually come as a young little Jewish white girl into a country where I had no idea. I didn't want to become a symbol of my people, if you like. I just wanted there to be a character who could take the shock and horror of her broken family, if you like, and the shock and horror of Evie's experience as a disempowered female voice without speaking for her. So it was a great challenge almost to take the theme and to actually create it within my own imagination and conscience, because the conscience of my people is different, say, from the conscience of Niq's people or your people, because I don't represent my race. But I Niq, I know a lot of you guys write, as Joanne wrote, as a black male. I was writing, I wanted to channel the past because of that haunting of my memory, but then turn it into a fictional haunting using the iconic or metaphorical ghosts of our culture in South Africa.
I especially appreciated how, I mean, you, as the reader, getting a sense of little Ruthie's vulnerability. For multiple reasons, she's having this experience of this character that's trying to subdue her. And I feel like, is she floating? Is she walking? Is she escaping? That feeling of escape. But she's, you know, I think I enjoyed the overlay of her experience of where she'd come from, what she'd left behind. And she's also, as a child, trying to process all of that experience. So, so immediately as a reader, you put into the body of a little girl and trying to process, not just reading from the outside. You're able to do that. You draw your reader in such a way that this short story becomes a freeze frame, or few freeze frames together, and you're thinking, how is Ruthie getting through all of these experiences? You did that beautifully with the story. So I was haunted by Ruthie's experience. I was able to carry that energy of saying, escape. She, there's something that needs to be she needs to get out of this in some way.
Just very quickly before we move on, because Joanne and I worked a lot together as sort of through Niq as the editing process, was to get that voice. And I mean, all of us who write short stories, I'm actually doing my PhD in short stories at the moment with UP and with David Medali, because it's specifically as a genre. I wrote a novel which was a kind of story cycle, but there's an overarch and transcendence in the end, which a lot of this doesn't have to have. But to get the girl who is based on myself but not myself, to get that tonality, to get that empathy, if you like, for the character that could then talk to the reader. That short story is an oxymoron. It took me longer to write this short story than pretty much my whole novel, because it's a write and a rewrite. And I'm very glad that it did resonate, because it had to have that quality without apologizing or philosophizing or even politicizing, because writing isn't politics. It's fiction, it's imagination. And I love the theme of the time of the writer, because I think all of us, memory, imagination, and conscience, I think kind of summarizes the thematics of the whole book from everybody's perspective.
You definitely got that successful, did that successfully. I want to tell you my process. I received the book on Monday afternoon and I went through the introduction. And your story was right up front. And I read a page or two, and because it was late evening, I could tell that I wasn't processing the way I should. This is not speaking to the story, just my own way of reading. So I went through one or two of the other stories and came back to it yesterday and had this fresh perspective as this was the first thing I was processing for the day. And that's when I really enjoyed getting into your story. So definitely I enjoyed getting into Ruthie's mind, so to speak.
Marvelous, thank you.
Mr. Shabangu, short story, but also as an actor, as a playwright, as a practitioner of of theatre. Speak to us about your story and about this leap, if we may, of taking on short story. Is it a limited art form compared to what you're used to? Does it follow a similar kind of perspective? And especially my question would be, how much of fact and fiction is there in your story in particular? Is it fact or is it fiction? That's what I should rather ask.
Right now, I'm coming from the same house that is in the story, which is my father's house. And I stood outside for the first time before I came to do this interview talk. So I looked at the house and I thought so much had happened in that house, but that house is still standing. And suddenly memories starts creeping back. And to be quite blunt about it, nothing in the story is fiction. It happened the way it happened. And people that even today are still puzzled by the fact that I'm still alive myself. And we're still staying in the same house. And yeah, that's it. So, but the beauty about this particular story is that this is my first ever writing, actually. I haven't written a play when I wrote this story. I arrived in Johannesburg in 1993 to pursue my dream as an actor, and it didn't happen. So in 95, I ended up enrolling at the Market Theatre Laboratory. So in our writing class, this is the story that I wrote. And I gave it to somebody to read it for me, and they dismissed it and said it's Ben Ogre and stuff. So I threw it away myself. And until the day we met with Niq, and Niq said, we must write the Hauntings and stuff, bring back those stories. And then I had to go back and revisit the story. But the biggest thing for me is that I'm so used to an audience that listens to my work and watch my work. So to shift from that and go to now an audience who's not going to listen to my work, who's not going to watch my work, but read it, is difficult now, because we have to explain it the very same way you explain it when you put it on stage. And then now on stage, you're using theatrical devices and other art forms to put the message forward. And then when it comes to writing it for the specific purpose of reading, is that all those theatrics should be in writing, in words, and we need to put it across for people to read and understand exactly what you're trying to say as a writer, the same way that you do when you're doing it as a director or an actor. So my personal take was that Nick is putting me on a difficult spot, because now I have to expose now some of the things, because when the first draft that I gave him, I was so confident with it, because I knew that I was writing a story that happened to me, but there were leaps, you know, in the story, because I knew that this I can't tell, this I can't tell, this I can't tell. So you leap, because now if you take the very same story and put it on the floor as a play, then those leaps will be actually covered by theatrics and other things that makes theater. So now the question is, it doesn't make sense, Mncedisi, that there's a leap here. So put in the weights so that we can link it. So now some of the stuff that are very personal and a bit private, they need to be in there to make sense moving forward. So I think that was the biggest adjustment that I had to make in writing the Children of the Devil and the Day I Died. And the biggest fear about it was the fact that when I started writing the first draft, I was excited that, I mean, I'm an actor, I'm a playwright, and then this novelist, the guy is saying to me, write down a short story for publishing purposes. I was like, it's easy, you know, I've done it before, I can do it, you know. So in 2 days' time, I submitted a very quick draft and it was easy. So he came back to me and started giving me notes, and then we started having these endless meetings. And I realized that this guy doesn't actually want a story, he wants me now. So I have to give him me. And yeah, that's then the fear of now going back to retrace my life and look at me and say, really, 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 didn't I not die on that day? Am I still alive for real, for real, for real, for real, for real? Because all these people that are in the story and I found comfort and sanctuary in them, I actually did. That's both my grandmothers, you know. I ran to my grandmother in the story. My grandmother referred me to somebody who is a prophet. And then after the whole ordeal, and then I ran to my other grandmother, who is my mother's mother in Durban. And then, yeah, and then she also dismissed me as like a mad person. And then a few years later, she passed on. And I'm not sure whether myself, am I still alive or not? And it's a bit tricky for me saying it right now, because I'm in the same village where the story actually happened. And I don't know, you know, and it's a bit cloudy as well outside. So it triggers some other stuff, you know, and the sense of fear starts coming back as well, that you want to still talk about the same village that nearly killed you, you know, because I've came back to this village as a playwright on several occasions to write other stories away from this particular story. And it's actually, it became a thing that has stayed with me longer, that I couldn't write about any other subject matter except witchcraft.
I think it's so interesting that a topic like hauntings has allowed for a lot of self-reflection, and it's inevitable. It's not just, you think that fiction is this easy way of hiding behind a veil, but it takes more out of you. And you've said quite rightly so that Children of the Devil is a real story. And perhaps Children of the Devil and The Day I Died, perhaps a celebration of being alive to tell the tale. And so this idea also of how much do we experience this world that's not meant to be seen, this semi-fictional, is it a gift to be able to see beyond the visible world, or is there a form of psychosis that takes one over? And I think in the stories in Hauntings, depending on your perspective, your background, the kind of cultural sort of education that you've had, we would make different sense of reading these stories. And maybe there'd be some eureka moments of saying, oh, wow, this is something I didn't contemplate. But fiction is a very clever way of being able to interrogate these fantastical, fearsome, and sort of potentially schizophrenic ideas. Niq, how much of these questions have come up in your conversations around writing, hauntings and writing about hauntings? This fine line between, is this a talent, a gift to be able to engage with the unseen, the lost souls, the tokoloshi? Is there a way to protect oneself, or is it purely fiction and anything of that sort would be deemed, psychosis, neurosis of some sort?
Oh, thank you, Shafinaaz. I think to answer your question, in short, I'll just say that for me, when I think about hauntings and a short story in general, for instance, I think of it as as an attempt. Personally, it's an attempt for me to extend the boundaries of my imagination, for instance, So but it's more important, for instance, to place it within a context. So each and every story, for instance, that I write has got an element, a haunting element within it, because it's me trying to retrieve those lost memories. It's me trying to imagine the imaginable, So that's what Hauntings actually also afforded me that opportunity to, for instance, get to know even the imaginations of other writers. I'll give you an example of many. There are lots of stories that are there, fiction and non-fiction in Hauntings. I think we got 3 fiction. Even if most of these stories that, as Mncedisi has already pointed out as well, they make you, when you read them, they make you, it's difficult for you not to associate them with a personal experience of a particular writer, So that's why in the when I wrote the the introduction, I mentioned the fact that this is Hauntings, because Hauntings, when we think about Hauntings, we think about things that are not things that are personal experiences, as I said. But hauntings we can be haunted by different things. We can be haunted by our greed, for instance, our own cultural beliefs, what we believe in, and then our own personal choices, and then even natural disasters, for instance. So I put together, when I was collecting these stories, we tried with the help of Joanne to put together stories that have got different kinds of hauntings that are not, like, for instance, there are certain stories that we decided they cannot go into the collection, not because they were not written well, but because the context, the things that they were discussing, that they were talking about, were almost similar to the other, even if they were well written. Some of them we had to say, no, because this particular theme like for instance, a theme of Tokoloshi or whether a theme of something has been, or of greed has been already discussed. Let's take other themes. Let's explore other themes. So that's why I say that it's we stretched our imagination, and that's what short stories has to be, and that's what we're looking for. We had, for instance, about 36, I think, if not earlier on, you know, I had 36 people that were contributing, but we had to cut it down to 19 because we were directed by the themes that as people who are haunted by different things. But a short story in itself, it's about haunting. You write, normally when I write a story, it's me writing about things that mean a lot to me. It can be things of the past. It can be things that are hearsay or personal experience, you know. So that's why we had to be careful around. I mean, we had to, it was not an easy task for us to, for instance, choose which story has to go in and not. And coming back to your question, I think Hauntings give us a sort of the infinite versions of what being haunted it's all about, you know. So it gives us many realities that we're living in, you know. So that's the power of the short story. And there's the power of this book in particular, because it gives us those stretched imaginations. It gives us those many realities, and some of the realities that we are not aware of, but they are within us. Like, for instance, a story that Joanne has written. I mean, if you, it's about things that, you know, when I read that particular story, I live in the township. It happened just a few meters away from where I live, you know. For the first time you wake up and then you decide to go and buy bread here, but the shop is closed. You have to catch a taxi. So I felt like this is a real, you know, it's a kind of haunting that I was not expecting. Okay, thanks.
And I think Joanne's story also brings up, you know, an impact not just on the actors within the looting. As you said, people around seeing it happen are haunted by this, will continue to be haunted by it. But it's captivating of the imagination of everyone who witnessed this on television, in the news. While we're talking about it now, we're all part of that experience in some or other way, haunted by the memory of it and the potential for it to happen again. Any sort of trauma can be that way. We are haunted by what has happened and what might happen in the future as well. And it brings me also to your story, Fireplace, where you bring a largely political bent, and you know, this concept of corruption within the state, this idea of not being able to deliver to people, watching a large divide between people, you know, people who have been promised various amenities and politicians who are enjoying you know, the spoils, so to speak. So you bring that through as something that haunts a nation, but a man who has to burn a few million rand worth of 200 rand notes is haunted by that burning note that could have been, you know, what he was.
Have we lost Shafinaaz?
Yeah, it looks like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to pick up there on your story, Nick. That I think it's the value of the collection is that there, you know, politics, fear of the future, folklore, witchcraft. Mncedisi is. It's such a varied, interesting collection, and you know, I fear that people think it's just a collection of ghost stories, and there are the ghost stories, but it is just so much more than that. So yeah, I'm just hoping that Shafinaaz will come back and take up the chair again. But yeah, Nick, do you want to say something about your story, and then maybe we can. Yeah, hopefully Shafinaaz will be back. Otherwise, we can move on to Lindiwe. Niq, unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah, yes. Thank you. I think, you know, when I was writing that story, it's an attempt to do a political satire. I'm interested much in political satires. And the story, you know, it's a continuation of a short story that I'd written before called Nailed, by the same characters. So I use the same characters to at least talk about, you know, what is happening within the political environment, which is affecting us. Shortly before we started this conversation, behind the scenes, we're just talking generally about potholes, about the state of the nation. We talk about, for instance, we talk about load shedding, for instance, that it might happen at some point, you know, we hope it doesn't happen while we're talking, you know, such kind of things. So in a nutshell, I was trying to, in that short story, I was just trying to attempt a political satire about South Africa, about where we are as a country, and then and where we're going, and also the fears that are there, you know, among the people of South Africa, for instance. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I was actually hoping also to get a piece read from one of the participants. There's so many wonderful stories here. I wonder perhaps of perhaps page 1 of Children of the Devil and the Day I Died, especially if we get it read by actor and author Mr. Shabangu. It would be such a pleasure to hear your story, the half a page of your story in your own voice.
Shafinaaz, the unfortunate part is that I forgot to mention it earlier on, because the characters that are in the story, I was scared if they can hear it from somebody else. So I gave all my copies to my mother, to my sister, to my brother, so that they don't hear it from somebody else, they hear it from me. So I'm still waiting for my copies. I don't have one at the moment.
Niq, can I ask you to read a piece? I know you're out in Berlin, so I'm hoping you have a copy with you.
Yes, I do have a copy. My piece, or which one do you want me to read? My piece?
I considered page 51, but if you want to read a piece out of
51.
your piece. Yes.
Page 51,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
51, okay, let me open that.
Or you can choose to read the introduction.
Oh, okay. Do you mean my intro? Which one do you want me? Do you want me to read Mncedisi's story or my?
Something that gives us a sense of what the overall, you know, the power of these stories.
Yeah.
And
oh, okay, okay. Okay, let me just read this just to from the introduction itself. So
yes,
that
the first 2 or 3 pages, 2 pages.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, I will just take it from the top. Okay. Although this haunting collection is not entirely about ghosts, it has triggered such ghostly memories within me. I'm grateful to all the authors, of course, you know. I'm grateful to all the 19 authors, and I would like to thank them for sharing these intriguing stories. For me, reading each story was hypnotic. Some stories took me back to the schoolyard of my childhood experience, bringing back my past and its own geography within it. It was like returning to my nostalgic youth, particularly as the stories took me from the living to the dead and back again. Imagine hitchhiking home, and a kind motorist stops to give you a lift. That motorist knows your life history and turns out to be more than you bargained for. That's what Ramusele by Rishoketu Maneze is all about. This story and several others echoed back through my memory to an untouched corner where bits of my childhood, my own childhood, still live. Zanele's Dlamini story, A Tire Between Life and Death, it's about the notorious sugarcane serial killer who dumped bodies along the R612 near Umzinto in KwaZulu-Natal. While reading this story, I kept imagining Vera the ghost. The Vera the ghost deadly eyes seared into my memory forever from the moment I first heard about her. Okay, same applies to Sibongile Fisher's Belted Lights, which is largely set inside the abandoned and dilapidated hospital in Tembisa. This story in particular made me imagine ghosts of the children and of the children of the ghost town. Okay, this collection shows us that as humans, we are always haunted by different things, ranging from our own greed, cultural beliefs, personal choices, and even natural disasters. What all these stories have in common is some unspoken sense of obligation we have towards one another and an urgent need for closure. The way these stories are told goes beyond the boundaries of a familiar, the known, the everyday, to explore realms of mystery, delight, danger, magic, and passion. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's enough for people to understand what the stories are all about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And you do, you explore, this fascination with magic in your novels, and you've done so in this collection as well, very beautifully, but also giving it a wide range of interpretation. Lindiwe, I want to hear from you, your vast range of short stories. You also have your hand up, so please do comment on what Niq was saying if you were welcome to. But at the same time, I also want to hear in terms of what kind of themes you've interrogated. Are these sort of similar, different from the Hauntings themes? Tell us a little bit more about your work.
Yeah, I've been itching to kind of piggyback on what Niq has been saying quite all along, and I think that a number of people have kind of said. And when I was thinking about this session in particular, I was thinking about it might seem academic, but like the idea of haunting and the idea of being haunted and whether or not there are differences. And those themes kind of come through in my own writings, and they come through in different manifestations. I kind of think of hauntings and being haunted as part of a continuum in a sense. So you kind of have these hauntings that Niq has kind of focused on in the volume with ghosts and ghouls and specters and all of those kinds of things. But in South Africa and in Southern Africa, and he begins to touch on that, we're kind of also haunted by these kinds of things that play themselves out in the public sphere, like the specter of apartheid, colonialism, and its children and its grandchildren of poverty and inequality and continuous oppression of women and people with different sexual orientations and those kinds of things, and those kinds of like hauntings that happen in the public space that chip away at people's individual spaces, kind of giving rise to individual hauntings that manifest in such things like, mental ill health, disease, malady, malaise, and all of those kinds of things. And those are things that I go into in my writing, which kind of sit under this big rubric of haunting and haunted. But I want to flip it a little bit and say that in my writing, I do not only focus on these negative aspects of haunting. So there's this other aspect of being haunted. And you can imagine a person saying something like, I have been haunted by this melody that has been playing in my head throughout the whole day, or I've been haunted by this, like if a lover has a conversation with a lover or a loved one or whatever, and that the memory of that kind of lingers. It's a kind of a sweet kind of haunting that happens that doesn't then kind of take this idea of being haunted or haunting and cast it in necessarily such a negative light, that there's a duality to it, or like a yin and yang to it, that you can be negatively haunted and be possessed or be hounded by these specters, but that at the exact same time you can be haunted by this kind of beauty. And it's at the nexus of that I try to write. I write at the nexus of hauntings that are oppressive and hauntings that are bittersweet, or that might actually even on their own accord be kind of sweet, right? And I think that the experience of life is kind of about suffering. Poets and philosophers write better about this than novelists and short story writers do. Like, everyone will experience disappointment, heartbreak, betrayal, sadness, loneliness, you name it. And those are kind of like personal hauntings that kind of visit every individual life. And that's the stuff of rich literature, and that's the stuff of the universality of story, and that's the universality of the story that kind of resonates with anybody from anywhere, South Africa, Southern Africa, the world, you name it. And so I just wanted to bring in this juxtaposition of the haunted and the haunting in both positive and negative lights, as in the yin yang, as the space from which I kind of write.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's an important sort of, bringing in that juxtaposition and understanding that haunting doesn't necessarily have to be a loaded negative connotation, but that having that musical earworm or making associations with positive memory, beautiful memories. In fact, one can be haunted by beauty as much as by something that is traumatic. Or in various ways. I think we've had such a beautiful discussion that can hopefully go on as more readers and audiences engage with each of your work. I'm so pleased that I had the opportunity to sort of interrogate some of the questions that came up while I read Hauntings, and we look forward to more writing coming off from edited and written works from each of you. Thank you once again for being a part of this discussion, this important discussion to celebrate the short story as a powerful form of interrogating various genres, and especially to bring out something of the nature that we did in terms of documenting our expectations around what it means to be haunted, to be haunting, and to engage whether we're more haunted by what we did or what we didn't do. And that's it from us on this afternoon's program. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in the audiences. I've seen comments coming in on Facebook. We've had a lot of engagement. Keep reading, keep writing, and I hope you've been inspired by these conversations.